I want to thank our CSL music team and also Donna Mitchell for the music today. And we're beginning our March series, The Lion and the Lamb. And our topic for today is Lent in a New Thought World. Because it's a new series, I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be the lion and the lamb, because both terms really apply to Christ. Spiritually, the lion and the lamb refer to two aspects of Christ. The lion being that conquering force, that lion of the tribe of Judah, and the lamb being the Christ who was slain. As the Lion of Judah, Jesus fulfills that prophecy that was made in Genesis, the coming of a Messiah. And as the Lamb, Jesus was the perfect and ultimate sacrifice, so grounded in what he believed and what his purpose was, that he was willing to give up his life. So this month, we're focusing on how to fulfill our own prophecies, how to know exactly who we are, how to focus on what we've come here to be, and know that it's God's great pleasure to give us the kingdom so we don't need to suffer. Imagine if everyone on the planet embraced being all they could be spiritually. If each of us took that 40-day Lent journey inward, if each of us embraced our own spirituality, giving up something that was keeping us from being our best spiritual self, or just starting to observe who we are and how we're behaving. And if each of us started right now planting those spiritual seeds of connection with the divine so that each day on the planet we became more connected, what would the world look like then? So each week I have a question, and your question for this week is this: what is the one choice that you could make today to bring about your best spiritual self? Starting now to plant seeds of connection to the divine. One more time. What is the one choice that you can make today to bring about your best spiritual self? Starting today to plant seeds of connection to the divine. Today's topic is Lent in a New Thought World. Now, Lent is historically the time between Ash Wednesday, and for those of us in the South, that's the day after Mardi Gras, and when Easter arrives. It's 40 days, but you might be thinking, well, hey, that's 6 weeks and 4 days, that's 46 days. But in historic times, Sundays were a time when people were not allowed to fast because it was supposed to be a feast day. So if you take away the 6 days of Sundays, we have a 40-day time period. There's great significance in 40 days in the Bible. And actually, 40 days is mentioned 157 times. 40 days is typically a period of testing, of trial, or of probation. Moses lived 40 days in Egypt and then spent 40 years in the desert, at which time God actually chose him to lead his people out of slavery. The Great Flood was 40 days. Did you know that? And before starting his ministry, Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. And it's that 40 days that we want to talk about today, that 40 days that Jesus spent connecting with his spiritual self before he began his ministry. Ernest Holmes says this: Spirit is at the center of each one of us. To it we may come for guidance, and from it we may draw both inspiration and the power to live, stand, walk, or sit. So what I'm inviting you to do today in this time of Lent is to tap into the Spirit that is at the center of each of us. To take the time between now and Easter to draw that inspiration that allows you to more deeply be your own spiritual self. So the question might be, what do you give up? Or possibly, how can you just learn to be a better observer of who you are? When I was young and observing Lent from the Catholic perspective, it always seemed like I was giving up something. And yes, I knew the story of Jesus in the desert and him being tempted, all these temptations placed in front of him. And when I gave up chocolate or sweets for Lent, I can tell you there felt like there were plenty of temptations. And in our household, Sunday wasn't a day off. So by the time Easter rolled around, I was really happy to get those treats in my basket. Now, as an adult, I understand more deeply the concept of Lent, that concept of a time to go deep within ourselves and find our best spiritual self. You know, it's not necessary to give up something. Rather, it's more about walking in the light of the divine. Think about that for a minute. About noticing what is holding us back from being our best spiritual self. So I invite you right now to think of something that might be holding you back from being your best spiritual self. Some examples might be watching too much TV, overeating, dualistic thinking, skipping your meditation time just because you're too busy, obsessing on your own flaws. Hey, that's a really good one. Procrastinating. Anyway, you get the idea. Think of one right now. Do you have one? Great. So now ask yourself, would it help to replace that habit with a spiritual habit? Maybe reading a spiritual book instead of watching TV. Or maybe taking a walk in nature. Because that's how you give up something for Lent. You give up the time wasters and replace them with something that is useful. Now, I'm well aware that a lot of my friends are probably saying, as soon as I try to give up something, I think about it constantly. And I know when I go overboard about trying to watch what I eat, I then become obsessed with food. So for those of you who might be in that group of people or in that camp of, I don't like giving up something, I'm going to invite you to just become the observer of your life. Instead of giving up something, make it your job during these times of Lent to just observe more closely who you're being and how you're behaving on a daily basis. And just start noticing throughout the day whether your habits are enhancing who you are as a person or detracting from who you are as a person. Notice when you're wasting time. Identify the behavior or the trait and just be observer of it rather than trying to banish it. By making that decision to engage in watching those behaviors that aren't so healthy, we can shift them into behaviors that are more healthy. And it creates a sense of being a witness to our real self. And when we hold those behaviors up to the light, we notice that as we shine the light on them, we might actually recognize that we're no longer engaged in doing something that's not really supporting our being our best self. You know, you have 86,400 seconds every day to use however you want to use them. And even if we take away that 8 hours that we're supposed to be getting for sleep, we still have 56,000 seconds or more. So when we start to notice those behaviors where we waste our time or where we are not in alignment with who we are, and I'm not talking about those times where we just relax, So if you watch TV to relax, great. But if you watch TV and aren't really engaged in what's going on, are there better ways that you might be able to use your time? Okay. So how do you really want to be? And how do you want to go about observing all of these behaviors and using this time of Lent to become a more spiritual person? I notice that when I become the observer of who I am, I can find those behaviors of how I really want to be, and I can learn to let go of some of those behaviors that aren't serving me. When we become aware of the incongruences we have in our lives, we can make choices which are better for ourselves. We can choose life rather than just allowing life to happen to us. You know, there are many deaths of unconscious actions that get in the way of our spiritual life. Dyer, in Staying on the Path, wrote, "Create an inner harmony where your living soul guides your spiritual behavior, rather than having your soul always come in second place." Create an inner harmony. Don't have your soul come in second place. Think about that for a moment. Do you really want your soul taking second place? I doubt it. The Upanishads have a great phrase. The silent one, the knower, ever resting in us, may walk, stand, sit, lie down, and do anything at its sweet will. The silent one that rests in us may do anything. Think about that power. So right now, make a commitment to observe that behavior that came up for you earlier when I asked that question. And as the reading today suggests, get quiet enough to hear the music in the garden amongst the trees. Get quiet enough to hear the music in the garden amongst the trees. There's a story about a young lady who told her mom that the next time she came to visit, she wanted to take her to see this daffodil garden. Now, the mom didn't know what all the fuss was about, but she reluctantly agreed. And the day they set out, it was kind of foggy and dreary, and her mom was real tempted to turn around and just give it up, but her daughter kept saying, "You'll never forgive yourself if you don't come see this garden." So they drove for about 20 minutes, turned down this little gravel road, and pulled up into this little churchyard, and there was a sign that said Daffodil Gardens this way. And so they walked along the path, and when they turned a corner, they saw this amazing daffodil garden. It looked as if someone had taken a great vat of gold and poured it down the side of the mountain. The flowers were planted in all of these majestic, swirled-looking patterns, each color having their own space. And it was breathtaking. And the mom said, "Well, who has done this?" And her daughter said, "Well, it's actually the lady that lives in that house over there." And so they started walking towards the house, and there was a sign that said, "Things you want to know about the garden." First answer was 50,000 bulbs. Second answer was one at a time by one woman, 2 hands, 2 feet, and very little brain. And the third answer was, began in 1958. And immediately, the mom began to understand this daffodil principle. They thought about this woman who had never met, that had created this garden that was so majestic and so beautiful, and she had done it one bulb at a time. After reading that, the mom was thinking about all the beauty and joy that this one lady had created by transforming this land on this mountainside to such majestic beauty. She had actually changed the world in which she lived and changed the world for the better for all the people that could see it. This became the daffodil principle, moving towards your goals, one step at a time, and often baby steps, one bulb at a time, until there was 50,000 bulbs planted on this mountainside. When we multiply tiny things and tiny actions that take just a little bit of time, we often find that we can accomplish magnificent things. And on the way home, the mom said to the daughter, you know, it makes me sad in some ways what I might have been able to do with my life if I had just started doing something years ago. And the daughter, being very wise, just looked at her and said, start tomorrow. Now, I might have said start today, but think about it. Whatever our lives have been like, we can start tomorrow to build our own daffodil garden, whatever it looks like, to plant our own seeds of connection with beauty and magnificence. Imagine how our lives might be if we just began to replace all of those ineffective behaviors that we were talking about earlier with ones that create a deeper connection with the divine. Can you imagine if each day you just took a little bit of time to do something that would make you more connected with that divine love? Imagine the great vat of love that would pour over your world, pour over the landscape of your soul. What would that look like? How majestic would the patterns of love that you built create a more spiritual life for you? Ernest Holmes, in 10 Ideas That Make a Difference, wrote this: there is an inner life into which we may plunge, an inner consciousness in which we may bathe. And as water purifies itself by flowing, so our inner realizations of the flow of life through us purifies the stagnant pools of our fears and doubts. Let's each take that plunge into our inner life, into that consciousness which bathes us in the realization of the flow of life through us. So let's participate in Lent in a new thought way. Let's take the 40-day journey into being our best spiritual selves. Let's enhance our own spirituality, give up something, or just become merely an observer of your behaviors. And start right now to plant your own garden of connection with the divine. One day, one step at a time. So here's your affirmation for the week. How is it that today I make the one choice to easily and willingly bring about my best spiritual self, starting now to plant seeds of connection to the divine? I challenge you this week to just spend some time each day remembering to take the rest of Lent and shift those behaviors that aren't supporting you into ones that support you to be your best spiritual self. So let's pray. We just move into a time of connecting with that oneness of the divine, with that beauty and that majestic wonder, with the intelligence, the freedom, the joy, the love that God is. And knowing that as our divine inheritance, all of that lives and moves right within us. And what I know to be the truth is that our own spiritual path can be shifted at any moment in time by our just connecting with the love of the divine, by our recognizing that love that is right within us, by that beauty that lives within us, by us just making little shifts to become our more spiritual higher self. So I am grateful. I am grateful to know that all of us have the ability to plant a daffodil garden in some way in our life. That all of us have that capability of making our soul first, not allowing it to take second place. And it's from all that gratitude that I just release these words into the law of mind, spirit, and action, knowing the truth. That who we are makes a difference in the world. That what we do can create beauty for ourselves and others. And that God has already called all of this good. So I can just let it be. Say amen. And we can affirm it together. And so it is.